Oh man, I missed the America Parade. Oh well, there's always tomorrow. We do this sort of thing every day around here. My neighborhood is extremely patriotic, in case you didn't know. I've been plowing through my cleanup, making lots of headway. All the bolts are cleaned and sorted. I've reordered the things that I stole from the GSX pile to fix the Hyundai, like the rod bearings. I should have done that a long time before now, but there's still a lot of parts that I need to prep for assembly, and this is one of them. You remember that I cut the baffles out of it in the Glyptal video. The real reason that I did that irreversible modification was because these breather ports are leaking all over my gloriously polished engine. There's either holes in the welds or I got a little bit overzealous with the flap wheels, shaping these things into something prettier than the globs of aluminum that they once were. It's most likely the latter. It's most likely my fault, but yeah, it leaks. Sure is pretty though. You can clearly see several holes where the fitting meets the valve cover. Strangely, two of those clearly visible holes don't even leak oil, but there are spots where oil seems to sweat right through the aluminum where there isn't even a hole at all. I don't mind the visible holes so much as all the oil leaking all over my painstakingly polished valve cover and head. I gotta look at this. So I've got a length of silicone hose that I plan to keep its airways open with. Yeah, I'm going to do something like that, I guess. I got some JB Weld, a spreader to mix it on, and don't ask me about the blue tape. Let's just get this out of here. Okay, now it's back again, hiding behind the silicone spray. Awesome. Back to the JB Weld though. I cleaned the silicone hose with silicone spray first. Maybe if I'm lucky, it will work like a release agent and make it easier to remove. Unlikely though, JB Weld's some really sticky stuff. I shoved a Q-tip into the hose to make it less flexible where the fitting's depth and angle cause a problem, and then I mixed up a batch of steel epoxy to fill in all the negative space with. At first when you mix it up, it's runny. When it fully sets, it's harder than most rocks. Not something you want to drill through or scrape or have to cut off. I don't want to do anything like that, and that's why I'm using the hose. The hose helps the epoxy all stay put where it sets. My goal is to catch it at its sweet spot during that time so that I can still clean up my work and mold and form it precisely where I need it. So right now that's what it looks like, and I've got a little bit left over here in this batch on the spreader so that I can check back and test its drying progress. You can see what I mean here. Way too gooey. Way too sticky. So yeah, we'll check back on this later. 928, 71 degrees. See? It's gooey. Okay, seriously, be right back. It's an hour later, still 71 degrees. Let's see what we're working with here. Not quite. That's, I think that's going to need a little more time. It's less runny, but it's still really gooey and sticky. Let's give it another hour. Man, I don't want to, it's just a few seconds to you guys, but... Alright, back at it. See what we've got here. Okay, I like that. We're exactly 2 hours and 1 minute into this, and it's time to pull the hose. Not too bad. I'm happy with that. It's still way too much. I'm gonna have to scrape some of this out of here and do some cleanup, but I can work with this. So 2 hours it is. That's how long you should wait to catch it in this state at room temperature. About 2 hours. But first, America Parade. Man, I'm all full of barbecue and cheeseburgers and loving that freedom. Where were we? Oh yeah, one more of these things to do. You know what I'm doing, and I feel like I described all this stuff pretty good the first time. Of course, this leaves me with 2 hours to kill again now, and this video is not about JB Weld, valve covers, and America Parades, so let's find some other way to burn 2 hours off. Oh yes. It's finally that time. If you're new to my channel, you're lucky I didn't build this thing 6 years ago. If you're not, you haven't seen this uncovered since it got its red Glyptal coating baked on. I didn't oil this thing when I got it home, but if your bit rate's high enough, you can see why you should just by looking at the thrust main. I'm probably going to get 10,000 questions about why is it red? Perfect coverage, not one single errant brush stroke. I've got to clean up and prep the freeze plug holes for their new freeze plugs. The powder coating, it's beautiful. That powder coating in the Glyptal preserved the majority of this casting better than any other treatment ever could, but untreated ferrous metals rust in open air. Not only must you oil ferrous parts, You have to revisit them periodically and re-oil them because it soaks into the part eventually and it leaves the surface bare again after a while. It's the surface that's what comes into contact with oxygen and reacts. Oil oxidizes too, just like the metal does. It goes away. I got surface rust on just about every cast and machine surface in here, and it's my fault. It was never supposed to sit for this long. It took me 2 years before I could get a good opportunity to clear out the garage and build the clean room. Because nobody makes light surface rust remover from freshly machined surfaces spray or ointment, now we're going to watch me show you how to deal with this kind of problem. Really, this is something you should do to your engine anyway before assembling it for all kinds of different reasons. I'm just going to have to do it a little bit harder and a little bit longer because of all of the surface rust. For starters, I grabbed some coffee filters in my can of automatic transmission fluid. Coffee filters aren't very absorbent, so I just use about a half tablespoon so I don't make a mess. After one pass, just around the top of the bore, it produced this much surface rust. You see that? That's crazy. This would destroy your pistons and rings. ATF is refined mineral oil loaded with corrosion inhibitors, detergents, dispersants, and surfactants. Surface rust wipes away with ATF and some elbow grease, and this process is all about the elbow grease. This is where you really get to know your block. This is where you feel with your hands if there's anything in here that will cause a problem. You'll feel the problem spots snag the lubricated coffee filter, and if you do feel that, keep applying elbow grease until the whole bore feels smooth and even, and until the coffee filters all come out clean. Here you can see the clean bore right next to a dirty hole. At a glance, it doesn't look so bad, but the only way you can see the contamination on these surfaces is with your hands in a clean white cloth. Grit from the honing stones can get left behind and wreak havoc on your new rings. You have to rub every single bearing surface and look at the cloth because your eyes are going to lie to you. Of course, there's such thing as getting lucky if you don't do these inspections and tests and procedures, but the best assemblers leave nothing to chance and double check every detail behind wherever others have worked. After what I experienced with the oil contamination on the Hyundai, you can see why I'm not going to stand for any of this anywhere in this block. Oil contamination from rust along with excessively high oil pressure is what caused the Hyundai's bearing failure, and that's why I had to rebuild it. Surface rust will easily wash away, becoming part of the oil stream and embedding itself into bearing and cam journals. I'm not having any of this with this engine, so I'm simply going to take the time to remove it all by wiping it off with ATF for as long as it takes until it's gone. I haven't encountered any pitting so far, and I hope I never do. This can be tiring. Your arm doesn't swivel 360 degrees, so this job demands equal rights and lefts. This is the engine block shuffle. Get your rhythm down because you're going to be here for a while doing this. Or like what happens on my channel, we go to plaid speed. You'll wear your arms out doing this job, but it's nothing worth complaining about. Here we have a splatter from the flick of a paintbrush, and it baked onto the cylinder walls. That's great. We learned in the video that 2+2 removes paint faster than any other chemical I tested. It can remove grease, dirt, powder coating, and the life of any insect it comes in contact with. Banned in your state? Sorry, you're going to have to move. While it worked great to remove one little Glyptal droplet, I'm going to ensure that all of the rest of the things that ATF won't remove are gone by carefully and completely wiping out the bores with this solvent so as not to drip any of it onto these beautiful coated surfaces. And wouldn't you know it, it's 2 hours and 1 minute later. Temperatures in the 80s now. Time to pull this hose and clean up my work. Alright, so you saw me do this before, but another thing this solvent is good for is wiping away uncured JB weld like it never happened. After scraping out the excess with a pick and shaping it to my liking, I just swabbed down the excess and it all came right off. But I'm not done yet. I've actually got one more hole to plug, and I'm getting a new baffle plate welded back in it once all this epoxy dries. In order for the baffle plate to fit properly and not interfere with the cams or valve train, it has to lay down flush along this ridge. But all these cast rivets that previously held the steel baffle plate in are now in the way of that. It would be more of a pain to have to drill 24 holes in the new aluminum plate to accommodate them, so I'm just going to use a Dremel with a sanding disc and grind them all flush for the guy that's going to do the job, just to be nice. Now that I've made a mess, I'm going to blow this out outside and patch the last hole. This breather hole was welded shut, but it weeps. It's basically an ornamental plug. Because it doesn't make a proper seal, I'm just going to mix up another small batch of JB Weld, fill it up from the backside, and let it sit for a couple of days. That pretty much wraps up the valve cover for the stuff that I get to do with it, so let's bounce back over to the block. We haven't been gone long, and you know that I've been working on my acute case of the surface rusts. Now, when this happens from humidity, you'll notice that the rust is not concentrated. It's just a discoloration, a dusting of the surface that's only mildly stuck on. It took years to accumulate this, with the block kept dry, double-bagged, and indoors. Left on its own, eventually it could even turn into pitting and take over because the side effect of surface rust is an increased surface area, where the part can more easily react with oxygen and humidity. It's the catalyst that accelerates the oxidation process. So far it looks like I caught this in time. For those that don't know, don't handle yours or other people's engine parts without gloves because your skin is acidic and salty. I'd have a real problem if this ever got wet and or handled with bare hands. ATF is great for this job, and especially in my case with the coatings where I can't just soak the whole thing in carb cleaner. But this is just one step in the cleaning process. ATF is not a solvent. It penetrates metal and leaves a residue. Some surfaces, like the ones I'm cleaning right now, need to be bone dry and oil free before you install bearings. So I'll have to remove the ATF that I'm applying to them right now once I'm done cleaning. I spent extra time on the thrust main, which on a 4G series Mitsubishi is the number 3 main. Mitsubishi put it right in the middle. You don't want dust, rust, or anything, including oil film layers of any kind, between your block and your bearings, because all those things have a thickness. Bearings have oil clearances that need to be correct, sometimes with the clearances measured to the 10,000th of an inch, so anything with a thickness will affect those clearances and machining tolerances. Even if this were an aluminum block, I'd still treat it exactly the same, because not only are the machines used to prepare an engine block for assembly going to leave their own trail of trash behind, even the hot tank bath leaves a residue. Oil, grease, rust, dirt, gaskets, adhesives, rubber, paint, carbon, everything you'd find on a used engine goes into that bath. The hot tanking process is a real time saver, sure, but where does all that trash go that was on your used engine? It's all in the bath. The block doesn't come out dry. Cast iron is porous, so there's a layer of dirt that won't come out without scrubbing it. After the acid bath, the parts should be washed with hot soapy water, and the machine shop I worked with did that, but following that cleaning step is when all the cutting oils, honing stones, and cutting machines come into play. So even if it's washed again, it's still not clean until you take the time to do these extra steps and verify that it's spotlessly clean. This is the lesson I want people to take away from this video. What you're looking at now are the freeze plug holes. There's remnants of sealants, calcium, and surface rust that have to go first before my new freeze plugs can move into their new apartments. They're only renting space here. I own the block. I'm just doing my part to make their space clean and available. So I'm using some medium emery cloth to clean up the bores first. Emery cloth is to a machinist what gaffer's tape is to a roadie. You wouldn't give a roadie masking tape because while it might be capable of securing some of the wires, it creates hazards for everyone else on stage. Likewise, an engine assembler shouldn't be using sandpaper. Emery cloth is different from sandpaper in that it's a cloth-backed product, and it uses emery as an abrasive rather than garnet. Emery is softer than garnet. It's less likely to become embedded in your work. Auto parts stores sell this stuff, so it's easy enough to use this instead of sandpaper whenever you need it. All I'm doing is removing rust and scale with it. The point isn't to remove metal. I just want a bare enough metal surface for the sealant that I'll be applying to grab onto. There are 9 of these things on the block, and they all get the same treatment. I did go an extra step and wipe them all clean with ATF. Remember that we'll be removing all of that before this is finished anyway. It didn't take long before I was done with all 9 holes. In case you're ever wondering, this is where you find the serial number of your engine. If you ever wanted to know anything about the production info of the block you're building, or you wanted to ensure that you're buying the right year part for your block, then this is a good place to start. It should match the one on your car's dashboard if it's the engine that your car came with. During the cleaning process, whenever the engine sits for a while, it's a good idea to leave a thick coating of ATF on every surface so it can keep loosening up the funk. To stretch your coffee filters a little bit farther, coat the cleanest parts of your work first and then work your way out. I'm telling you this because I got to take a little break for America Parade. And now we move on to the razor blade portion of the cleanup. Rule number 1, if a gasket touches metal, clean it with a razor blade. Rule number 2, if sealant touches that metal, clean it with a razor blade. Rule number 3 only applies to Jafro. If paint or powder coating got on it and it's flat, clean it with a razor blade. Don't worry, you don't have to do the mains. They neither have a gasket nor a sealant touching it, so that's good. Get to save some time there. The razor blade cleanup exposes two things. It exposes how ATF doesn't remove everything, and it exposes how ATF lifts out dirt as it sits. I said earlier that ATF contains detergents, and it really doesn't. At least not modern ATF anyway. What can be said about its cleaning properties when described or as demonstrated here would leave you not questioning that it contains detergents, except that it doesn't. It used to. Heck, ATF made before 1958 even had whale oil in it. They've put everything in it over the years. But today it's different. There are no detergents, so don't bother arguing about it. I'll add my own detergents later. Right now I'm using a solvent. There was some Glyptal smeared and baked into this journal earlier, and now it's gone. After the razor blade cleanup, I have to carefully apply and scrub all bare metal surfaces with solvents. I can't use solvents like acetone or alcohol, and definitely not any of the other ones inside this spray can on any painted or powder coated surfaces, because it'll destroy and remove it. Most of you won't have these kinds of problems, but I do. I have to be careful and terrible. This step will remove the ATF from bare metal surfaces. It will remove all remaining funk and leave no residue. Not all solvents are the same, I'm only speaking for this one. I wipe all machine surfaces until my coffee filters come out completely clean. That's when I know I'm done. Next, I blow all the coffee filter lint out with compressed air. Super important, glove up. Must not touch metal with bare skin. I'm using the thread repair kit that I introduced in the previous video to clean out all the bolt holes and the one stud that I'm not bothering to replace. You do this process entirely by hand so you can feel when the threads are clean. Some people use cutting oil as a lubricant for this, some use WD-40, I'm just using ATF. It's fine for this kind of thing. Skipping this step isn't cheating, it's failing, because all it takes is cross-threading or seizing one bolt because of something that you failed to do that can turn your dream into a nightmare really fast. Dirty and damaged threads are a surefire means of causing fastener problems during assembly and even later on down the road. So while it's all apart, clean up all your threads and find out what you're working with. That's your responsibility if you're building it. The thing I'm using is called a chase or a thread chaser. It doesn't cut, it doesn't remove metal, it doesn't have sharp edges. It fits the threads and it has fluted reliefs to clear any junk, corrosion, or scale that it encounters in there. You clean and inspect threads with this tool, and you can typically straighten threads that are bent or lightly munged with very little effort. When you encounter a rough spot, you just work it back and forth until it gives way. If you're using it correctly, then you shouldn't ever need to use the hex on it except for extraction in the rare event that it manages to get stuck inside your work and that you can't get it out with the same pair of hands that got it stuck in there in the first place. Some people will disagree with me about this, but you really don't ever want to side load this tool, and therefore the threads of whatever the thing is that you're trying to fix by torquing on it laterally. Socket and combination wrenches will do that, and you can create some serious problems that way, especially if the part's aluminum. So with some patience, you should be able to work this thing through any salvageable threads, even bent ones, by hand. But if for some reason you can't, if you encounter threads that are badly damaged, threads that have an adhesive, sealant, or thread locker that solvents won't remove, or threads that have welding splatter fused into them, or thick powder coating like what I've got going on right here, then you've got a good reason to grab a tap or die and cut material away. Otherwise, grab the spoon instead of the shovel. Whether the threads are inside or outside of a hole, this type of a thread repair tool will tell you how bad it really is and what you'll need to throw at fastener problems that you encounter. And it'll typically fix most issues, preventing the need for even removing any material in the first place. It's the friendliest way that you can handle your parts, and that's important with old or valuable things that you can't replace. Taps cut, they remove material. Used improperly, they can even destroy the thing that you're working on. They're extremely hard, but that makes them brittle, so they can break off in a dirty hole if they're not lubricated right, or if they get cross-threaded. Good luck trying to drill that one out neatly. We all have bad days, but I've learned over time from using destructive means of thread repair that this is really the tool that you should grab first whenever you have a problem. Chances are that you can fix your fastener problems through non-destructive means. Just be advised that there's no 11mm anything in this kit. That's significant only because that's the diameter of the main bores on all 4 G63s from 1989 to 99, and also the head bolts on all 7-bolt 4G engines. You won't find 11mm anything anywhere else on a 4G63, but if you don't have one or you can't get an 11mm thread chaser, then you can make your own out of a spare bolt. I've done it. I'm just not making that video because others already have. And I went out and bought the whole thread repair kit. Maybe grab one of your old main or head bolts and watch someone else's video about it and make one. All I'm going to do for you is give you a nice 4K close-up of how the cutting edge of the tap compares to the chase, and how you'd maybe have to cut your old bolt to match the direction of the reliefs on the one that I'm showing you right here. You guys are smart, you'll figure it out.
You figure it out!
Most of my bolt holes worked out just like this one. Work the thing back and forth when you find a problem spot and it'll clean right up without much of a fight. But there were a few where the plugs leaked during the powder coating process, or the coating was so thick that I couldn't even find the hole. If I forced the thread chaser through it, I could push powder coating into the threads. Many have discovered before me that there's no thread locker quite like powder coating, and I've been warned. Give that engine a heat cycle and it's a permanent thread locker. Wherever I encountered it, I just cut out the excess with a tap like I'm doing right here. You can see how thick it was. This is one of those where I couldn't find the hole. I didn't sink the tap, I just cut what I needed in order to access the threads, and then I chased the rest. I always hand thread my fasteners whenever I'm doing an engine assembly to help me feel potential problems, and this keeps me from having any stupid fastener issues. My next order of business is the main oil gallery. I saved myself the headaches and just had my machine shop knock the plug out for me. I've got a clear shot to scrub this whole thing out now. I'm just using a brass-coated steel brush that's slightly bigger than the hole. Be careful because you can get this thing stuck in here. It's about as rigid as a coat hanger, and there's also something called metal fatigue that can help you continue getting it stuck in there even worse. Only rotate it in one direction. As you run out of handle and transition from push to pull, keep rotating it the same direction the whole time. The turn is the trouble spot, so leave yourself just enough handle to push and pull on while you're making the turn. There's a loop in the handle that you can shove a screwdriver through for a better grip if you get it stuck. All that crap on the floor is what came out of my block. After a half of a stack of coffee filters, a few ounces of ATF, and a 55-gallon drum of elbow grease, the block is almost clean and ready for assembly. I pulled all the main bolts, leaving the suitcase handles in place for the next step. This is because I need to be able to quickly remove and clean them once we're done washing out the block. You'll get to see how fast rust forms on cast iron once we're done with that stage. Removing these first lets me wash out all the oil for the main bolt holes and more quickly dry them. Some might insist I'm doing all this in the wrong order. Really, you could and should have done this next step first, but I wanted to remove as much existing rust as I could before creating more. I wanted to ensure the edges of where the coatings end at the flange surfaces don't interfere with the parts that bolt to them, and that any stray coatings that got baked into cylinder bores or bearing journals were fully removed first. What comes next will flush out all the things I can't reach. I want to remove any potential spider houses, mud dauber nests, dust or debris, or machining remnants that fell down into the oil gallery holes. You have to clean out the stuff you can't reach because it only takes one little piece of trash to block an oil passage, wipe a bearing face, or a cam journal. The bores all came back to where they were right after it was machined. They're bone dry right now because they were wiped out with solvents. Same goes for the mains and the bounce shaft journals and the flat machine surfaces. I didn't watch this thing 24/7 for several years to ensure that some creature didn't crawl in here and build a house. I can't see inside the coolant passages, but I do feel good about what I can see, what I'm starting with, and that it's free of paint or powder coating wherever it matters. I know my gaskets will stick, my bearings will seat, my rings won't get contaminated, and my bolts will all fit. Great, now let's do this all over again. I filled my power washer with hot water and a laundry pod. Laundry detergent is an acceptable soap for washing engine parts. You can also use dish soaps that are good at cutting grease. And for part of this process you should, because you can't fully clean everything with just a power washer. You can use a brush, a sponge, or a cloth for this. It doesn't matter. I prefer a cloth. You start by scrubbing down everything that you can reach. It's extremely important once you start this process to work fast and keep everything wet. Don't take phone calls, tend to your kids' bleeding wounds, or rush off for a bathroom break once you begin. Scrub everything. Keep it wet. Scrub the engine stand too. Faster, Jafro, faster! It doesn't matter that I quickly blew it dry with a leaf blower and compressed air. This is how fast cast iron rusts when it gets wet. You'll notice the rust is a different color than the dark brown stuff we wiped out earlier. There's hydrogen, oxygen, and minerals in potable water, and they will all quickly react with the metal, so it's imperative that you immediately oil and wipe clean all ferrous parts after doing this. This is the second half of the commitment you made when you got it wet. Now you must suffer the consequences. This is just like what you saw before. ATF and coffee filters. Do the engine block shuffle. Get everything wiped down until they come out clean. Clean the deck. Clean your flange surfaces for the water pump, the oil pump, and the front case. Remove the main caps and clean the mating surfaces. Clean the bearing journals. Next, I finally get a chance to clean the infamous 6-bolt suitcase handles. I can finally get a close-up and really scrutinize them. I gave all of them a thorough wipe down with ATF until they were clean, and then I let them soak for a few. On the thrust main cap, there's an oil groove that goes all the way around the full circumference of that bearing. I made sure to clean into the corners of that gap all the way around and gave it the same treatment on the bearing journal and mating surfaces before putting them down and turning my attention back to the block again. I used clean, dry coffee filters to wipe away any excess until I found no rust or no dirt. More of the engine block shuffle kind of thing. You get really good at it over time, lots of practice. It's not even the last time. The ATF residue traps dirt, so you follow it up with solvents. Solvents remove the embedded ATF and it lifts out the rest of the dirt that you couldn't wipe away. Leave the bearing surfaces dry and ATF free, but retreat the cylinder bores once you're done with the solvents. This is how you want it prepared prior to assembly. I'm not assembling it yet. First I'll be taking measurements, so I'll re-oil it later in the clean room. Once I've got all my surfaces dry and oil free, I blow out all the coffee filter lint and roll it into the clean room. Some of you asked how I was getting it into the clean room. My answer was bunny hop. That was my bunny hop. Now that the main cap's been soaking for a bit, I'll give them the same solvent treatment to lift out the ATF and one at a time blow the lint out and put them into the clean room. You see how repetitive this process gets. Some of it could have been eliminated by washing the block first and then using oils and solvents to clean it, one and done. This final cleanup was a lot easier, a lot shorter, and I feel good about having gone over the whole thing twice. I'm glad I did it like this because I know every square inch of it and I know it's clean. I know that nothing from the machine shop or that either one of the powder coating shops exposed it to is left inside that block. This level of detail is a necessary evil whenever you let anyone else into your build. You don't know what processes they use behind closed doors unless you asked all the right questions and got honest answers. Some shops blast engine parts with glass beads because they know they're going to wash them afterwards. Hey, it saves a lot of time. I understand why they do it. Engine parts should be blasted with soda or walnut shells because that kind of media is oil soluble. All it takes is one little nook or cranny in the crankcase, air passages, or the water jacket to let go of some of that blasting media that washing and compressed air didn't remove, and to let loose on the first heat cycle and completely destroy everything inside your engine. That's what I was referring to when I said what I said about working behind where others have worked. You're not being mean or distrustful to those people when you're double checking them. You're just being thorough on something that you have your own hands in. It's a lot easier and more justifiable to go through these extra efforts when that thing belongs to you, but accidents can happen. Costly, painful, and time-consuming accidents that nobody should ever have to go through. So when you're building an engine, there's no such thing as too clean. I'm going to peel the tape and get this valve cover back to detective coating to get a breather baffle welded back into it. It's a cool welding service that they offer as long as it's not an Evo. Those are magnesium and they explode if you weld on them, so don't try it. Those all have to be carefully drilled, threaded, and screwed back into place. And finally we get a chance to see this engine in the clean room up under the lights. I'm going to enjoy bringing this build to you in a place where there's enough light to see it. It's a milestone to have this engine in here right now. To me, with having 4 project cars on a 1/3 acre cleaning the engine and having a clean place to assemble it is probably the hardest part of the challenge. This is an acceptable means of cleaning any non-electrical parts used in your assembly. Everyone does things a little bit differently, but this is how I did it. I hope you like the new video format that my Patreon supporters made possible for me, and if you're new to this and you like this kind of content, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the bell if you want notifications for the videos of it that follow, and I'll see you soon for another episode. Until then, stay tubed!